welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us on what I hope has been a lovely day for you all. It's been gorgeous here in Shropshire. This is the last in the winter series of webinars that we're doing, and hopefully we're going to have a good evening on brassicas and how brassicas can help you on the farm with your forage supplies, you know, either during the summer or the autumn or the winter as we go on. And the guys will talk to us about that now. Please, can I encourage you to ask questions? Use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll either interrupt the speakers or we'll ask the questions at the end if I know that the question's going to be covered. I am recording the session. I don't know why I have to tell you that, but apparently I do. And please fill in the survey at the end of the webinar. There are basis points, or there's a basis point and Dairy Pro points available for this. So if it's basis points you're after, you need to make sure that we've got your registration number. If you didn't put the registration number in when you registered, let us know what your number is and we'll make sure you get the points. Dairy Pro, obviously you have to notify them tomorrow that you attended the webinar and they will allocate the points to you. Please ask questions as we go along. Otherwise, thank you very much. I would like to introduce Helen to you, who many of you will know, obviously, and William. You'll introduce yourself, guys, won't you, as you start? So we'll go on from there. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm Helen Mathieu. Probably quite a few of you know that, and I will endeavour to smile and not look quite so serious. Thank you for the messages. So, yeah, so brassicas are, I'm sure you're all aware, utilised in a wide range of situations and environments on a lot of different soil types and at all sorts of altitudes for all sorts of livestock systems. And basically, the reason is they're a very cost-effective crop to grow. So the seed is inexpensive. Some of the crops, if they're well managed and well prepared, they're going to yield up to 10 tonnes of dry matter and water per hectare. With growing costs of around 4p per kilo of dry matter, that equates to around 40 pounds per tonne of dry matter. That's a feed with a value of around 11 plus ME, with protein in the high teens, grazed in situ. So there's nothing of that quality that you can buy to feed at that time of year for that price. So, you know, it's worth, to get the best out of the crop, it's just worth that little bit of attention to detail at the outset to try and produce as good a crop as you possibly can in terms of yield and quality and getting it in front of the animal at the right time and so on. So planning a successful brassica crop, you should have selected a field or the area that needs either renewing, or maybe it's something that's coming back into production from an old grass lay, or maybe it's coming out of cereals. You know, there's lots of different situations where we can use brassicas. Soil testing in good time, which I hope everybody's doing anyway. We need to determine the soil nutrient status and apply the correct nutrients for an optimum crop. So remember, and I'm sure you hear this quite a lot, not just from us, but remember, your crop will only grow as well as its most limiting nutrient. Lime, obviously, we're saying lime well in advance because lime takes quite a while to work through the soil profile. So if you're low pH, you need to make sure you're liming in good time. So it's an ideal opportunity to clean fields up, get some weed control going there with glyphosate, generally before drilling, but also you can use it after you've grazed the crop off. You know, you've got a seed bed there with very little cultivation, and if there's any weeds around, then you can clean it up again post grazing. So choosing a suitable brassica crop based on your needs, William's going to cover that in a great deal more detail shortly. But essentially, what we're doing is working backwards from when we need to feed the crop. So whether that's summer, autumn, or overwintering. Bear in mind what rotation, so what crop the field is in now, when it's going to be available, and what crop you want to follow the brassica with, and then how many grazing days and so on before you want to that you want to feed the crop over, and how long it's got to reach that you know, optimum yield, and what animals you're going to put in. So William will go through that with you in detail in a few slides time. So site preparation, we've already said soil testing in good time. If we need to lime, we want to get that on at least a couple of weeks beforehand. So the optimum pH is between 5.8 and 6.5, probably around that 6.2. So very similar to grassland. And we really, as well as you know, lime taking time to work its way into the soil profile, we need to avoid applying late with brassica, particularly with Swedes, as late applications of lime will restrict the uptake, or the availability, should I say, of boron, and they're a particular trace element requirement for Swedes. So you'd use a boronated fertiliser as well there when you're growing Swedes, but that's what can affect boron availability in Swedes. Weed control, we've already mentioned, but do think when you're setting up, you know, how you're going to feed the crop out to make it as easy as possible, both for the livestock and yourself. So stating the obvious, really, we want to try and graze downhill. It's a lot easier to move wire and fencing and ring feeders downhill than it is in the other direction. And think about how you know, the fencing is going to be. Are you going to block graze it? Will it be ideally like nice, long, narrow breaks? So you want to move that fence every day to make sure animals are standing on fresh ground, whether that's strip or block grazing. It's a good idea to think about a feed budget, so you've got an idea how many animals there are going to be, therefore how many bales of fibre that they'll need to eat, and then get them into the field while conditions are good, while the soil conditions are good, so you're not making, you know, you're not creating any damage. And animals are also obviously going to have need access to water and probably grass or run back area to stand on and probably even graze alongside. So all those things need to be taken into consideration when you're preparing the field. So how do we actually drill it when it comes to it, a successful crop? Well, ideally, we're looking at soil temperatures of around 10 and warming. So typically in sort of the part of the country where I live, sort of around Cheshire area, that would be around when you're drilling maize, maybe a little bit before that, but not much. Generally, you need those soil temperatures of 10 and increasing. So it's a very small seed, you know, it needs good conditions to go in. It does depend obviously on timing and what crop type you're drilling. So obviously there'll be people that'll be drilling right up until possibly even the end of August, depending on variety and so on. We're going to put on the fertiliser on the seed bed as far as possible, certainly the P&K based on soil result, and then most likely top dress with nitrogen. So it's a very small seed. We're looking for a grass seed type of seed bed, really, so very fine and firm seed bed. And we need to remove all the competition from any of the other plants are there. So that's grass or decaying plants or whatever. And then nice shallow drilling just into that top centimetre. And then, you know, nice fine firm seed bed. Seed rate for brassicas, generally the kales and the rapes at least between 2 to 3 kilos an acre. So if you're broadcasting, it's probably nearer 3 kilos. And if you're direct drilling, it's probably nearer 2, obviously 2 kilos per acre. Obviously, in optimum conditions, you could go for a lower seed rate, but you must remember that if you are drilling at a lower seed rate, you're going to increase potentially the thickness of the stem and the bulb size. While you might want a bigger bulb, you don't really want a much thicker stem, and obviously a higher seed rate is going to have the opposite effect. And whether you're broadcasting and harrowing, make sure you roll afterwards. And if you're direct drilling, again, we need to roll afterwards just to make sure we're pressing it into the soil so we've got good seed to soil contact. Keep an eye on the crop. Flea beetle and so on can decimate a crop very quickly, as can things like sawfly. And frequently we drill with slug pellets. Likewise, particularly if you're drilling and you've got that line, which is like a little motorway for the slugs, they can move down a line quite quickly. So either drill with slug pellets or keep your eyes out for those as well. Typical establishment program here. So the bit of the field you can see on the left of the picture there. This is it was part of an upland project. We're about between 1100 and 1300 feet here. And we soil tested in the autumn, we limed, we've got a pH then in the spring, our pH was around 6.1, 6.2. The P's and K's were pretty good up here. They're quite sort of tired old sheep pastures. P's and K's were around 2s and 3s. We had an early grazing on the field. Actually this year it was after the snow had gone, so the early grazing was already April. We took the sheep out, we had some regrowth, then it was sprayed off when the crop was around 6 to 8 centimetres, so that's 2,000 kgs of dry matter. The crop was sprayed off. You leave the crop then for 7 days. That's to allow the pesticide, that's to allow the glyphosate to translocate through the plants, not to do with the animal particularly. It's to make sure that the animal, as the plant, has had the opportunity to take in all the chemical to really kill it off. It was then grazed down hard again to remove all that trasher and the loose material. This particular field, we felt the surface was quite panned. It was very hard, it's very, very tight in the surface. So we went across it with an aerator. So an aerator with sort of, 6-inch blades on a roller. And then we put fertiliser on. The fertiliser on the seed bed was 40 kgs of P and 60 kgs of potash of K. And then we drilled with, it's kind of an Aitchison, I think it was an old strip seeder drill that they used up here, but it was 2.5 kgs an acre of Red Start, and it was a strip seeder type drill, and then we rolled it. So I was saying, make sure you get your lime on in good time, but sometimes when you have that amount of sort of rotting turf on the surface, that rotting turf, then you're adding nitrogen to it, which is further going to acidify it. You can get quite an acidic layer if you're not careful, which, as if you're trying to direct drill grass in, that surface layer can become quite sort of, acidic and toxic. So in some instances, it can be worth top dressing with one of the, very fast acting prilled limes just to neutralize the surface. But be careful, don't do that with if you're growing Swedes.
Helen, can I just interrupt you, Helen?
Yeah.
Question that's come in that's quite relevant is, would you plough in that situation?
We don't tend to plough an awful lot for brassicas. We try and, create the tilth and the seed bed that we need. You remember, a lot of these crops, we're hoping to get animals in there in 8 to 10 weeks. Some instances you might plough kale, certainly something like fodder beet you'd probably plough, but as far as possible we'd try not to tip it all over. We just don't want to get it too deep and fluffy. That'd be my experience. I'm not saying that there's not instances when you wouldn't, but if we can preserve that top layer to hold the animals up, it's going to help us when we come to put the animals in the field. So yeah, just make sure you can get good seed to soil contact then, and shallow fine surface layer. Say in this instance it was a strip seeder, and yeah, away you go. Then we top dressed this particular field just post emergence. We went in with 60 kgs of nitrogen. We didn't feel we needed sulfur here, but I'll talk about that again in a little bit in a few slides. So this field, this one's actually in Yorkshire, not far off the Woodhead Pass, and you can see a very tired old sheep pasture again, sprayed off with Roundup, rotivated, and then we broadcast the seed on and then rolled it in. Now you'll see where the seed has fallen on good tilth, if you like, in the dark brown on the righter side of the slide. We've got a really good plant numbers, we've got good plant populations and a good establishment. Where we haven't broken that sod up, on the left hand side, there is no germination hardly at all. We've got very, very few plants. So that seed to soil contact, just creating that tilth, is most important. Talking about fertiliser, as you'd expect, I've really just lifted this from the RB209, just to give you an idea what we what we need and what we should be doing. This assumes that the soil indexes are 2, so that's nitrogen, phosphate and potash indexes of 2. I've already said, there's a wide range of situations, so you do need to know what your starting point is. And your nitrogen index obviously is calculated either based on your soil type and previous crop and rainfall, or it's not very often done because it's costly, but you could also do a soil mineral nitrogen test. So assuming indexes of 2, in the seed bed we'd have the P and K, that's sort of 25 to 20, something around there, and potash between 20 and 50, depending on whether you're low 2 or high 2. That can go in the seed bed. Also in the seed bed, if you know you're in a sulfur deficient area, put sulfur in the seed bed. Do not top dress brassicas with sulfur. They are high in glucosinolates, those sulfur compounds, and top dressing with sulfur is just going to exacerbate that, which can be an issue for livestock later on. So nitrogen, you can put it in the seed bed, but a lot of people would top dress. And obviously, if you've got very good P and K, you're probably trying to get them away without P and K anyway, but top dress with nitrogen. You see here that the kale recommendation for nitrogen is nearly double that of the other brassicas, and it's growing for longer, and it's a much bulkier, and there's a lot more green leaf to it, so it has a higher demand. Now, it does base also, you can adjust these fertilizer applications according to what you think your crop yield is going to be, your crop potential. And the hybrids, particularly if we're going to try multiple grazings, we're trying to regraze it on the regrowth, then I would suggest that we're going to use more nitrogen, that as a second dressing. William will talk to you about that as well in a moment. So boron, as we've already said, particularly for Swedes, you get some boronated nitrogen fertilizers, and make sure that you top dressing with nitrogen and boron. Quick picture here just to prove the point about the importance of phosphate, really. So this is some Swedes growing in New Zealand, and some of the trials in New Zealand looking at different fertilizer application rates. The left hand side, you probably can't read the label there, but it had 60 kgs of triple superphos in the seed bed, and the other side just had 60 kgs of urea. So phosphate availability at establishment, as we know, for all plants, but particularly brassicas, is crucial, really. And you think about it, it's a tiny seed, and we're trying to grow 10 tons of dry matter in 6 months. It needs all the help we can get to get it going. Just looking at the effect now of nutrient deficiency, so you can see the different discoloration there, which is relative to the whatever the deficiency is. Very often purpling is associated with phosphate deficiency, or phosphate unavailability, which could be because the seed bed's too cold, or it could be too dry, or it could even be too wet. And sometimes if the crop's strong enough, it can grow away from it. But correcting soil deficiencies, if we don't, it will have an adverse effect on the crop, and it can severely reduce yield, and therefore it becomes quite a costly crop to grow, but also they lose their palatability very quickly. So when we're looking to improve output, soil testing is essential in good time, and it's important that we deal with any nutrient deficiencies. A little bit on pests. I'm sure you're all aware that there's really not a great deal we can do anymore. There's certainly nothing we can do for soil pests. There are contact pyrethroids available on the market, but we do have to be very careful, and we have to use them very sparingly. A lot of these pests have developed resistance, so you must always make sure that you're taking the advice of your local agronomist. Flea beetle can decimate a very small crop very quickly, and sawfly will attack it probably a bit later, but they can also make quite a mess. You can see that interveinal shredding there in that picture on the left. That was sawfly damage, and obviously moths and cabbage butterflies and those sort of things will also have an effect. Slugs, normally we can drill with slug pellets. We put the slug pellets in the drill at the same time, or top dress very quickly with slug pellets. And soil pests, really well, we're using the Brassica to help break the cycle of soil pests, but there's no treatment other than to try and make sure we're getting the optimum conditions to get the crop away as quickly as possible. Disease, the main disease, there's nothing we can do about it other than rotate crops, is club root. So club roots are caused by a soil-borne pathogen, and it's a spore, and it infects the roots, and as they're released into the soil, so the roots break down. But those spores, those fungal spores, can live in the soil. They're like a slimy mold. They can live in the soil for up to 20 years. So when we say, you must have a break every 5 years, just grow brassicas 1 year in 5, that's primarily why it's club root. Okay. And you can see what the effect is there. You get those gnarled sort of roots, finger and toe, used to call it. And you get very stunted plants with purplish foliage above ground as well. So please make sure you're doing you're getting a rotation going. We see occasionally in sort of milder weather, damp weather, leaf spot can develop quite quickly, alternaria or foma and that sort of thing. So as far particularly as the club root is concerned, all brassicas are susceptible to club root. None of them are completely tolerant. But there are varieties that have been tested for better club root resistance. And certainly all the varieties that Germinal bring to the market have gone through either testing in New Zealand with our partner breeders in New Zealand, or they've come through things like Maris Kestrel came through, well, it was SAC at the time, SRUC now. They've come through the club root testing systems then, and they are as resistant as any, you know, that they're as resistant as they can be. But that we will always tell you, you know, to observe the rotation. Field setup, well, we've probably covered that. You know, essential to think about your run back and how you're setting up your fencing, and remember, you know, fibre, water and minerals for the stock. And in previous webinars we've talked at great length about how to feed brassicas and feeding them safely, and, you know, sort of things to look out for. So really I'm not going to go into that in a great detail. It's just to remind you, you know, to allow a week to 10 days, maybe even 2 weeks before you give them full access to the crop. So introduce them very, very slowly to allow the room and time to adapt. Also, you're trying to make the animal eat the whole plant, you know. Strip grazing we've talked about. I think the easiest are these nice long narrow breaks when all you're doing is walking down that line or going down on the bike and just moving that wire up to the feed face. So you're giving them basically around 1 metre a day. And then, you know, you're getting your maximum utilization out of it that way. If you're thinking you're trying to produce a regrowth for subsequent grazings, you'll need to back fence it. Some people will use a double fence just in case they break over and then tomorrow's fence is already there. And people will set the field up in such a way to allow them to graze, you know, multiple mobs and so on. And when it comes actually to that feeding time, make sure you know how much you're feeding. So you go in with your metre square, you cut your metre square, calculate the fresh weight, your average fresh weight across the field, and then you multiply that by a dry matter percentage. In the brassicas will be probably between 12 and 15%, and that'll give you your tons of dry matter per hectare. So you can allocate the actual requirement for you know, the animals that are there.
Sorry, can I butt in again? Is a long narrow break strip better than fencing off an area within the field?
I think it depends largely on the type of animals. Cattle, I think a long narrow break can work better. Sheep, sometimes it's easy to put them in blocks, but it depends on the shape of the field. And certainly I've seen people growing things like red start where they're trying to get multiple grazings, and they will put the field in blocks and they will move around each block, and then by the time they get back to the 4th or 5th block, there's enough regrowth on it. So, you know, it depends very much on how you know, what works for your shape of field. Bear in mind that, you know, they've got to have access to this run back, or they want an area to lay on. The thing is, with a long narrow break, you're putting them on fresh ground every day. They will stay, you know, they'll spend a lot of time on that feed face, and they'll go and lay on the feed face as well. You know, so if you can do a long narrow break, I think that's the best one. But whatever works, or, you know, works best for your system, really. Oops, I haven't read that one yet. I haven't done that one. So feeding recommendations, just really to remind you, you know, that they're a great source of energy and protein. The energy and the sugars are primarily in the bulb, in the root and the bulb, and then the protein, the higher protein, is in the leaf. So, you know, think about that. We want to try and make sure that they eat all of it, and calculate the dry matter. I mentioned that earlier. And things to sort of check for really are the maturity of the crop. William's going to cover when the crops are reaching maturity. Make sure we're feeding adequate fibre. Nitrate, you've heard us when we're talking about feeding brassicas, talking about the potential for nitrate poisoning. That's about, you know, making sure that the nitrogen has all been used, that the crops sort of stop growing and so on. But you can test for nitrate if you think it's potentially an issue. You know, you can do a tissue test, and making sure obviously that you're feeding minerals and water and so on. So this is my last slide before I hand over to William, and really it's just to say it's about best practice or cross compliance. And the important thing when we're using brassicas is to use them safely for our livestock and for our animal health, but also for the soil and for the waterways. So this is, you know, particularly if we're going to use them for outwintering. So the appropriate fields are you know, where we're not going to be able to lose any water or sediment. So we've got good sort of headland or buffer strip areas where if there is any sort of freak events and we've got too much water slopping about, you know, it's not going to get into any water course. So any water courses are well protected. We're well away from it. You know, if we've got heavy soils, you know, we're not going to be able to support outwintering with heavy stock. A lot of it is sort of, it's common sense, really, making sure we've got runbacks and so on. And that shelter, when we say shelter, we obviously don't mean a shed. We're thinking of either walls or hedges or, you know, the contours of the ground that allow livestock to get out of the driving rain or you know, that wind. But if they've got fresh feed in front of them every day and they've got green, clean ground to stand on, that will go a long way to, you know, to support them. And so moving them onto fresh ground every day. No tractors in fields in the winter. We don't want to, you know, cut into the ground and cause those great big ruts and channels where the water can run away quite easily. So it's all about animal health. So making sure we've got animals in good condition before we try and outwinter. And they've been bolused and they've been vaccinated and all the rest of it. And they've got good winter coats on them. And you know, really think how we're protecting that soil and we're not causing any risk to the waterways. So I'm going to hand over to William.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. A few questions coming in. Please keep sending in your experiences or questions. Helen, just while you're unsharing your screen and William's taking over, if you're broadcasting with a fertiliser spinner, do you recommend mixing the seed with fertiliser or slug pellets to get a bigger quantity of seed to sow?
Yes, both, I would say. And that, you know, we used to spin a lot of stubble turnips on sort of post first cut. You know, years ago we used a lot of stubble turnips as a break crop on dairy farms, and very typically it would be post first cut, and we'd fill the fertilizer spinner and put the brassica in and the slug pellets and give it a good stir around, and away you go. It's not a very even or accurate way to do it. Just make sure that you don't put the stubble turnips in the bottom, because they'll all come out the first run of the field. So you do need to make sure that you've got it all the right quantity of everything in the drill and it's well stirred. But it can work really well. Give it a good harrowing first of all, just to kick up a bit of tilt. But yeah, that's a well-proven method.
Yeah, and maybe try and broadcast at a low rate and go different directions.
Yeah.
Right, William, over to you. Thank you very much.
Right, thanks, Ben, and thanks, Helen, for that section. Helen has talked through the practicalities of growing brassicas, and in this section, I'm hopefully going to briefly go through the why use brassicas and what brassicas fit in where. Let's see, I'll move on. There we go, we're moving on now. In this first slide, this is what we would assume is the typical grass growth curve in the green bars there, and that equates to a really good grass crop of about 10.9 tonnes of dry matter per hectare. And the lilac strips are when you would look to be normally utilising brassicas at the shoulders of the season to lift the total forage production across the farm. And this is what we would normally see, but this graph shows you what the reality is. And this was taken from Grass Check GB, which I'm quite sure some of you on tonight are aware of, and I know one or two of you are actually participating in. But when you look at this graph here, the green line is our dairy farms, the yellow line is the beef and sheep farms. But that shows you the variability. But what really stands out is the blue line. The blue hashed line was the grass growth from 2019. So you can see there the differences year on year between them. So there's going to be pinch points on each individual farm in terms of when you're going to be short of forage, and the weather is going to have a big impact on that. But there'll be general times when you'll fall into these pinch points, and we'll hopefully try and deal with them tonight. The first one really is your summer pinch point, and that's when you're in light land situations or in dry areas of the countryside and prone to drought and out. We've got the autumn pinch point when you're short of grass as the grass growth falls away, but stock demand is still high. And in the winter, the pinch point when grass has almost stopped growing. And by this, I mean you're trying to extend your grazing season and then lift the tons of dry matter and forage you can produce into the winter, or even out wintering over the course of the winter. Now, the obvious admission that I've missed is the spring pinch point. And really, to tackle that spring pinch point of forage shortages, you're looking to tackle that over the course of the winter. And that's by winter grazing of brassicas to allow your grass to still grow slowly as it does over the course of the winter, to be there to meet the spring demand. For it can take a grass lay from being grazed down to the residual to being back up to the 3-leaf stage over the course of the winter. It can be up to 120 days to get from the 1,500 kgs of dry matter residual back up to over 2.5, 2.8 when ready to graze again. So that's where the brassica fits in for growing and grazing over the course of the winter to allow the grass to rest and recuperate and grow on. Now, there are two questions that we as the area managers are always asked on a regular basis. The first one is, how much does a brassica grows? And here you have the information there. We've got our dry matters, our kilos of dry matter per hectare, and also the energy produced. Now, all this information and a lot of what Helen and I are talking about tonight is available on the Germinal website. There's a brassica grower's guide there, and some of the more detailed information is on some of the product information sheets as well for each of the crops as we go through. The other question that we're asked a lot of is, how much do I grow? How many acres am I going to need to feed this amount of stock? And Helen touched on it earlier on there. If you think about, it takes 2% of an animal's body weight for maintenance and 3% for growth. Now let's take an example here. We've got suckler cows. If you take a 600 kilogram suckler cow, you're going to need 12 kilograms of dry matter for its maintenance requirement. And as we're only aiming to supply around about maximum of 80% of that dry matter from a brassica, you're needing 9.5, 9.6 kilos of dry matter from brassica. So for 100 cows, we'll round it up for easy counting, you're needing 1,000 kilograms of dry matter per day from your brassica. So if you've got a good crop of kale that's going to produce approximately 10 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, therefore 1 hectare is going to last you in the region of a week to 10 days for those 100 cows. So a 10 acre field, 4 hectare field is going to last you 4 to 5 weeks, giving you a little bit of leeway. And by doing that, you can work out your amount you need. And if you know the width of your fence, you then know how much you need to move it forward every day. And by doing that, you can work out where you're going to put your bales, as you saw from that holding slide to begin with, where the bales are placed to give you that forage component and the dry matter for the cow's ration over the course of the winter. Likewise, if we take stubble turnips grazing ewes, a 60 kilo ewe, you're going to need about 1.2 kilograms of dry matter, 600 odd kilograms of crop per day for 500 ewes. So a good crop of stubble turnips will normally produce you about 4,000 kgs of dry matter. So therefore, you're going to last in the region of that month for the 500 ewes in your 4 hectare field. But it's worth remembering again that if you were to plant weeds, they'll probably yield double that of stubble turnips. So that therefore the area is going to last twice as long as well. So to work it out, as Helen said, you take your metre squared, measure your fresh weight, work on an average of between 12 and 15% for the dry matter, and then multiply your kilo dry matter, your square metre kilogram of dry matter by 10,000 to get tonnes of dry matter per hectare. And that gives you a good guide to start with and how to work out your allocation going forward. Now, looking at some of these pinch points, if you're looking at a pinch point for in the summer, then we're looking at sowing brassicas probably early May in this part of the world where I am in Scotland, depending on soil temperatures, to be able to have them ready for that 8 weeks later when you're ready to needing to graze them at the pinch points when forage is getting short. So we'll start and look through. We've got leafy turnips. This one here is Appin. You're sowing that last days in April, first week in May. You're then going to be ready to graze it 6-7 weeks later. So that's you into the second half of June, first week in July. But if your pinch point isn't at the first week in July and later in July, then you move your sowing date back so that you're trying to hit peak yield and peak quality at the time when you're needing it at that normal time of year for when you're needing it. And here you see we're looking from these leafy turnips at about 46 tonnes of dry matter. And because of that high leaf to bulb ratio, we've really got a nice good quality there of 13 ME and between 17 and 18% crude protein. And these are just guides because we've seen vast variations in brassicas in terms of the quality when we do actual analysis on them. And one of the benefits of these leafy turnips is if they're grazed, but not grazed really hard, then they have the potential to come back and be utilised later on in the season again as well. Stubble turnips, well, Helen mentioned there that in her part of the world in Cheshire, they could be sown after first cut silages. It's not something we see an awful lot of up here in Scotland, but it is another option instead of the traditional time of sowing a stubble turnip after a winter cereal. You can drill them again in May, you're ready to get a higher yield, you've got 6.5 tonnes of dry matter, again a nice good quality product, but if you sow it in the spring, you're at the time you're utilising it in July for grazing either cows, or in this case you've got wean lambs on it to try and keep those wean lambs progressing and get them away fat, relieve the pressure on the rest of your grazing platform. And also, if you use this system, it gives you a nice clean worm-free grazing option for these lambs to try and keep them motoring on. Now the hybrid brassicas, red starch and swifts, these are all about when you want to utilise them. That's the important thing. If you're looking to utilise them in midsummer, then you can sow them 7-8 weeks before when you're looking to utilise them. They might be ready to graze. And as Helen said, and I'll show you some slides later on, we've got the opportunity to not graze it the traditional way you would graze a brassica, right to the ground, leave some stem, leave some green leaf, give it another run with some nitrogen fertiliser. It will grow back again and produce you a lot of feed for later on in the season as well. So these are extremely versatile crop, the hybrid brassicas. The autumn pinch points, again, we've got our grazing turnips there. As again we said, it's all when you want to utilise it in terms of when you want to sow it. The same with your stubble turnips. Again, after your winter cereal in this situation, get them sown and they're ready to winter period, or even into an old lay, get them grazed, sown into an old lay, they're ready to graze over the winter, and that's helping to clean that lay before we go back with a reseed the following spring again. And then we've got our forage rapes and our hybrid brassicas. Now our forage rape, again, we're looking at sowing it 8 weeks to 10 weeks before you plan to use it. And it's all about the good leaf to stem ratio with these, so that you can achieve that 10 to 13 ME of energy and 45 tonnes of dry matter. And because of the good leaf to stem ratio, you get really high utilisation from the Avon forage rape. But the biggest disadvantage with all traditional forage rapes is that there's no regrowth potential the way there is with the hybrid brassicas. And in this situation, we're looking at some trial work we did in 2018 with our hybrid brassicas. This was a crop of red start. It was sown on the 9th of June. It was grazed in September lightly. And with lightly, I mean you're grazing it down, and in this instance, it was block grazed the way Helen was talking about earlier, and they rotated around about the blocks to allow it to regrow. They left, it was about 6 inches of stem, but they left some leaf on it as well, so that it was able to photosynthesize and grow on. And what happened, the stems were slightly thicker than we would expected from a crop that was only to be utilised once, but you had all this leaf that had come back on the regrowth. And here we have got the quality for that regrowth. Again, you're looking at that quality regrowth there, the ME of 12 and a crude protein of over 24, and that's in the leaf. And you also had a surprising amount of energy and protein in the stems. And because they were still nice and soft, there was a really good utilisation of these stems in the second regrowth. And with the calculations that we made, we estimated that we had between over 4.5 tonnes of dry matter extra growing between the grazing in September and our grazing in late November, at the end of November that time. So there's a huge potential there to utilise these crops more than once if you manage it well and look after it. The winter pinch point, and this is the traditional name for this, is our main crop, brassicas. And this is when we're looking to sow them at the end of June at the latest, and they take about 20 weeks to get to maturity to be ready to graze through the winter period. We've got brassicas in, the hybrid brassicas in here again, are Red Starch and Swift because of that flexibility. Swedes and kale we'll cover in a minute. We've included fodder beet on this picture. They're not a brassica, but they're used in a similar way to Swedes. But careful consideration, very careful consideration, has to be given to variety selection to achieve an acceptable utilisation if you want to graze them in the field. You're looking for varieties that sit well out of the ground with a low to medium dry matter so that they can be utilised by the stock. And it's the fact that they grow deep into the ground against a sweet which sits on the top that makes them difficult to achieve an acceptable utilisation, because they are an expensive crop to grow. They're upwards of about £1,000 a hectare to grow. The trial Swede, now the figures that we see here, this is taken from that trial work we did in 2018-2019, to 14 tonnes of dry matter per hectare, and that's from the bulb yield. But one of the things that we found in comparing Triumph with some of the other market leading Swedes was that the Triumph has a very long leaf retention period, and that added another 2 to 4 tonnes of dry matter, and that was a significant crude protein content of over 25%. Now, there's more details in the trial work we did on the website and also on the Triumph product information sheet that we've got. Now, the big thing about Swedes is the fact that they sit on the top of the ground, so you're getting maximum utilisation as opposed to fodder beet, which go down into the ground. So that's where you're getting the big benefit with Swedes in the terms of the cost of dry matter production, as well as much lower, about 4 pence, as Helen talked about earlier on. Now, traditionally in Scotland, Swedes were precision drilled. It was all ploughed, worked, and graded seed that we used. But with the calibre of some of the modern direct drills on the market, we're getting, particularly we see it in Wales and in some upland areas, swaths are getting sprayed off, getting rid of that material once it's sprayed, and direct drilling into that sward to get a nice sole to the there that's going to carry the stock over the winter. It's not going to be too light and fluffy. And one of the things I'm going to emphasise again, what Helen said, is getting boron in the fertiliser. That's really, really important. It's almost an annual thing that one of us always gets called to see is Swedes that haven't had boron fertiliser. They talk about the brown harp. There is a potential to do it with in sprays, but in the experience I've had, you tend to find that by the time there's enough leaf there to spray with the boron spray, it's too late and the damage is done. Would always say for that little bit extra cost, boron in the fertiliser guarantees that helps to guarantee that you're going to have a better crop rather than taking the risk of doing it with a foliar application. Maris kestrel, we've really got a long utilisation period for Maris kestrel due to its winter hardiness, and we're looking at between 10 and 12 tonnes of dry matter at this kind of 10 to 13 ME and 19 to 20% protein. You see there we've got between 85 and 90% utilisation, and that's because the breeders tell us that it's hit the sweet spot in terms of the lignin content of the stems. There's enough lignin there to hold the crop up, but not too much that it makes it difficult for the stock to graze and also utilise. And because of the height of Maris kestrel, it's able to be utilised and grazed by both cattle and sheep. And it's the main crop brassica. We're looking at 20 weeks, same as some of these other ones, from sowing to utilisation and utilising oat through the course of the winter period. In summary, hopefully we've demonstrated the versatility of brassicas and adding to forage production and where they can be used to fill gaps throughout the year. They're also very cost effective to grow, as we said, about 4 pence per kilogram of dry matter, but this doesn't take into account the extra protein supply that they have as well in some of the leaves. One of the things that we haven't spent a lot of time on tonight is the benefits of growing brassicas in renewing leys. Not just the increased fertility from stock grazing, but also the fact that it gives you 2 opportunities to tackle weed issues. And now that we have no control of soil pests, for example, leather jackets, a brassica crop aids in breaking the life cycle of the leather jacket and increases the probability of a successful reseed following your brassica crop. And finally, really, with sustainability and traceability becoming ever more important, the extra energy and protein produced on farm by these very flexible crops, they are worth considering and how they can work. And any of us in the team are quite happy to discuss these things with you in private at a future date if you wish. And all the information Helen and I have discussed tonight is available on our website in the Brassica Growers Guide and also on the individual variety information sheets. And I think that's us, and we'll move on to questions, I think, Ben, if there is any.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you, guys. There are quite a few questions and comments to get through. I just want to reiterate what William said there. If you go to the Germinal.co.uk website, there is a section there on catalogues where we've put together a Brassica's Growers Guide, which is a, I don't know, 25-page document all about how to grow any sort of brassica from start to finish, all the problems you could encounter and how to get around them. So go and have a look at that. And also, as William said, there's product information sheets on each one of the different brassicas on how to grow them and how to utilize them for the best for the farm. Right. Michael Shannon compliments you on your photo of a crop of brassica, William, which is not surprising considering I think it was probably one of his. But he also says, evening, Michael, he also says, fodder beaten Scotland's taken a hammering this year due to the hard winter, and it should be sold with a warning. If you get hard frost, forget it. Any comment from you two?
I think that's... you have to be careful what you say there, Michael. I would say you're expressing your opinion, and that's good to hear. But there are people that grow it successfully. But the question for getting successful fodder wheat crops is the dry matter content. And if you're going to use a crop that's for grazing in situ, as I know that you like to do, Michael, then you have to use a lower dry matter crop. So that's going to make it more prone to the vagaries of our unpredictable Scottish winters. The higher dry matter crops, they will have tended to get through this winter better than the lower dry matter crops, unless Helen's got anything else to add as well.
I think I agree with both of you, but I think it is an expensive crop to go, which was your final comment about it, and frost will kill it, and it's the lower dry matter ones that sit further out of the soil, so they can be susceptible to frost. But then the other thing really with them is if it's a wet winter, you know, the animals disappear to the hock. So, you know, don't get me wrong, fodder beet's probably the high shielding crop you can grow, but to be able to utilize it is something different. So I think it's only for sort of favorable areas and light soils is my opinion, but yeah.
Another question on that is why have mangles fallen out of favour? Is it possible to still get mangles? It is possible to still get mangle seed. I have supplied mangle seed in the past. I think the fallen out of favour is exactly this sort of comment, that they are even lower in dry matter and higher in sugar, and the winter hardiness of them is even less. I always used to think about it as giving sweets to kids. You're going to have trouble with the ewes as well. Right, let's move on. Going back to Helen, and you're talking about liming and Swedes. Mm-hmm. How much time would you allow for after liming before you drilled Swedes?
I would try and lime the autumn before, really. You know, that early. You'd want to give it a few months. You might not get an opportunity. It's taking a chance to get it on in the new year after January. And if you're thinking you're drilling in May and you start to run out of time, you know, I would make sure that you've done your soil test, you know, when you've finished applying all your fertiliser and your muck the previous year. So you're probably, you know, a 3-month gap between any nutrient applications. Take your soil test then and act on it immediately. So you're trying to get it done in the sort of November time. So it's got plenty of time to work through the soil profile.
Okay. Just on this establishment side again, what would you do in an organic situation after grass? You plough, power harrow, chicken muck, drill and roll?
Organic, you know, that they are susceptible to pests, to flea beetle and things, and you've got no, you know, there's no fire engine, you can't kill the grass or or anything like that. So you've got to try and destroy it by rotivating. I've not had a lot of experience of successful brassicas, I'm afraid to say. I hope, is it John? I hope, John, perhaps you have, but I think if you can get the seed, it depends on you know, Ben will know what organic sort of hybrids we might have available, or whether you can get derogations to use hybrid. But the key thing is...
sorry, Helen, go on.
Well, no, the key thing I think in organic is speed of establishment and getting the crop away. You'd have to destroy the old sward somehow, wouldn't you? Or it was just going to take it over again.
I think in that situation, you're absolutely right, aren't you? That it is actually getting rid of that competition that come from the grass is more important than and try and get a firm seedbed after that. There is very little organic brassica seed about, and derogations are granted for brassicas in organic situations.
I think the only thing for establishment I would add to that, Ben, is to get it ploughed over early and let any of the weed seeds there germinate and chip, and power harrow it to try and create the stale seed bed before you go in. It's taking it out for a little bit longer, but if you can eliminate that competition, you have more chance of success.
Yeah, yeah. What effect does growing brassica have on the soil organic matter? As we're looking to improve that and help carbon sequestration long term, and does it affect the biodiversity of the soil? Sorry, my dog's going mad.
I think it's going to increase the organic matter content because you've got all those stock, they're standing on that field, so you've got a high volume of dry matter to be eaten. You've got a lot of stock in a small area moving forward all the time. So not to be too crude about it, but they're peeing and shiting where they're standing eating. So you're getting all that organic matter back into the soil there and then, as well as any of the crop that they don't actually eat, they're going to be getting that broken down into the soil. So you're increasing your organic matter there straight away. So that's bound to be a help to your organic matter, and is helping biodiversity. Well, the biggest enemy to biodiversity is the fact that if you run through it with a plough, you lose half your worm count straight away. So if you can do it by direct drilling it, you're maintaining that soil biology, and by feeding it with all this extra organic matter, you're going to be helping to lift it at the same time and broaden that biodiversity.
We're doing some brassica trials, aren't we, down at the Germinal Research Station? We're looking at all sorts of things, including soil quality. So it's something that, you know, with time we'll have a lot more information about what's happening to the, you know, the quality of the soil underneath them. Something that we can probably look at. Yeah. But second what.
Okay. Our outwintering field for next year is very light, and I'm worried about a hot, dry summer. We have access to the field from now on. Thoughts at the moment are to drill some kale. Is this the best crop to handle the situation of the dry summer that's potentially going to come in the growing period of that crop?
Probably, I would say, if you can drill it without disturbing the soil too much, so direct drilling rather than, you know, ploughing and getting the soil too fluffy. So you're trying to retain as much moisture and create a really good, you know, really good surface, and drill it before it gets really too dry and too hot. So you've got a good root and a well-established plant hopefully before we hit a drought. But who knows when or if we're going to hit a drought. You know, but I would say probably kale. Yes, it's, you know, if it's got that root network, it's going to cope with it as well as anything, you know. And certain years, you know, we've seen them just sort of sit there for quite a long while, and you think it's not going to come to anything, and then all of a sudden you get to August and it rains on it and it's away, you know. So
yeah, I'd agree with that. I don't think there's much other alternative. Swedes I don't think would do it. Kale is your best option. The only other option is whether, you know, I know you don't know when your dry period is going to come, but whether you were to drill at the end of July, August, and drill a hybrid brassica and utilize that for the winter if the dry period has passed through by that point. It's another way to do it, but certainly the kale is your biggest crop with your most guaranteed winter hardiness, isn't it? So that's definitely what we'd look at. One here from Mr. Bill Riley. Nice to hear from you, Bill. What amount of nitrogen would you advise for a second round of grazing on hybrid? And another question to tie into that, at what point in the hybrid would you would you graze it? How long after you've drilled it would you start to graze it if you're going to multiple graze? Yeah.
Right, right.
So
if you multiple graze it, you're looking to get on in good growing conditions. You're looking to be getting on there after about 7 weeks roughly. But it's a case of going and having a walk through it and seeing the growth on it before you do it. And it's not so much the stage that you're growing it at or grazing it at the first time, it's how much you leave is the important thing to get it to regrow again. And the ones that I have seen doing it will go back on, and I'm afraid that I'm talking in old money, which Bill will not understand. But we would normally talk about going in at about 50 units of nitrogen to the acre. Again, somewhere between 40 and 50 to give it that boost and get it growing again. But it's walking the crop to know what's there and knowing and not overgrazing it before you move them on. It's more critical than actually when you're going to graze it, I would say.
And I agreed completely with that. The other thing we've learned at the research station in the last couple of years is with this regrowing ability, if we leave it too long before we go in, and we've left it at various different trials and left it till 12 weeks, the regrowth that we're retrieving after that is considerably less. So if you are going to regraze, then definitely 7 or 8 weeks is when you need to be in there and get it back fenced and get out. Thank you very much for that. One question here. I've had a palatability issue with brassicas in the past. Is it all brassicas or are some worse than others?
Low palatability?
Yeah. I think it refers mainly to around the moving in period, getting the animals used to the crop. Obviously, if you're going to graze brassicas and change the diet, then as Helen was talking about earlier on, then the run back area is essential, and gradually change the amount of access that they have to the crop on a basis. Some brassicas can be unpalatable. They have different glucosinate levels and things like that, which can make them slightly bitter. And it is a case of getting animals used to it as you introduce them to the crop.
You don't have too many reports of them not, provided the crop's in good condition in terms of disease and nutrient deficiency and all that sort of thing. Generally speaking, a well-presented crop, okay, it might take them a bit of time to adapt to the taste of it, but generally speaking, I've not come across anybody saying, oh, they won't eat it.
Not long-term palatability issues, no. Question here, any work done on mixtures of stubble turnips and hybrids and the effect on yields? Usually aim for a July sowing after cutting silage for outwintering cows.
I've not done any trial work on mixtures. People do like mixtures because they like the bulb and they like the leaf, so they like to combine, a turnip with a rape or a hybrid or even a swede with a kale and that sort of thing. I haven't got a particular view. I'm not sure you're adding a bit of diversity. I'm not sure you actually grow more, and quite often, if you're not careful, you're creating a leafy plant and there's too much shade getting down to something that's maybe a little bit slower and less aggressive, less vigorous to get going. So it impedes the progress of the other plant. So my recommendation tends to be for one type, but I appreciate that people do like to, have a little bit of diversity and put various things in there. But in terms of does it grow you more in overall dry matter, I think it probably doesn't. People do look at it.
The only thing I would add on to that, Helen, and I think I would agree with what you said, but one of our participants who's been commenting away going forward and sending me messages tonight on the phone, instead of mixing them together, we'll sow them in strips. So that you've got each of them in strips, and therefore you're grazing them up the strip, and then you've got the benefit of, as he would call it, your total mixed ration in the field there as you're going forward.
Yeah, that can work.
The only other thing I'd say on stubble turnips is your timing for drilling is perfect. End of July, third week of July, something like that. The rule of thumb with stubble turnips is for every 2 weeks after the 1st of August that you drill them, you halve the yield. So if you wait till the end of August, you've got a quarter, 25% of the yield as if you drilled them at the end of July. Last question then for tonight before we wrap it up. Would you advocate companion crops like Italian ryegrass with brassica, with hybrid rapes for a summer crop? What other species might work?
as an actual blend all mixed together, it's a possibility. You're putting fibre and a different source of nutrition in there. You tend, again, though, your brassica tends to, if you don't get the balance right, or one grows faster than the other, you tend to sort of stop the grass growing, or it doesn't quite work particularly well. You need a very low rate of brassicas. The Welsh have a little trick where they'll put a quarter or half a kilo in a reseed, won't they, Ben? And
quarter of a kilo, half a pound tops.
Half a pound,
quarter kilo, half a pound tops. Otherwise, it nicks all the moisture.
In a reseed, and then they go and nip the top off as soon as everything starts to grow. That can be, in effect, you're nipping the top off the grass. You're encouraging it to tiller, and you're encouraging anchorage. But the more brassica you put in, the less grass you've got. I'd like to see us at some point start to use sort of bicropping, where we're, as a little bit like William was talking about, where we have a row of kale and a row of swede, so you've got rows of different crops. And I think it'd be interesting to see people growing rows of brassica and trying to grow them with, say, rows of oats. I've seen some of that done in New Zealand, so you've got your fibre and everything in the same field. So there's lots of things that we could look at more than we do, and certainly people do grow grass with a little bit of brassica, depending on what you want to achieve at the end of it. Would I advocate it? I don't know. It's an interesting comment though there, David, about companion crops, because we get the question about flea beetle. And again, from the research station, we've been looking at different companion crops in establishing brassicas. And I think I'm right, Ben, in the most successful was buckwheat, was it? Was that what?
Yeah.
That came out as the best companion crop to help with flea beetle? Which
we think is masking the smell of the brassica seed establishing. But it's the buckwheat crop, the buckwheat seed is a triangular seed, and it's not the easiest to drill, but it did have that best results in that particular trial. The only other thing I'd wonder about with that Italian option is the Italian going to seed. If it was drilled and it vernalized and you had seed heads forming in that year, you could potentially end up with Italian ryegrass plants in the field, self-germinating and coming on and being a pain in other crops in years to come. But yes, it's certainly done. We sell plenty of Italian ryegrass with brassica in it, and as Helen says, the Welsh have this lovely little trick of putting a small amount in to protect the seedlings, capture the moisture in the dewy mornings. Then you've got the lambs grazing it off and treading in the grass, and if done right, it works well. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there now. We've just gone past the hour, and the research and the survey that we've done tells us that that's the optimum time for everybody. So thank you very much for everybody for joining. I hope you found it interesting. The recording will be available in the next few days. And in a couple of weeks' time, we have a session on a Tuesday night on lucerne. So if you're interested in lucerne or potentially growing lucerne, join me and a couple of farmers who are doing it. To talk about the benefits of lucerne as a crop and feeding it as well. So thank you all very much for the evening. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the questions. I wish you good night and good evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Bye.
Bye,
thank you.
Bye.